And I will do that now, acknowledge country by stating that the Shire of Esperance acknowledges the Kepikul Wodjiri people of the Noongar Nation and the Naju people who are the traditional custodians of this land and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to Elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to Aboriginal Australians today. Thank you. Now we move on item 2, it's attendance, and we have all councillors present. Excellent. And we have a number of Shire senior staff members present here this evening. Thank you all for being in attendance. And then we go to apologies. Are there any apologies? Everyone's here, I believe, so there's no need for apologies. So we go notification of grant leave of absence. Well, we move on through that to the applications for leave of absence. Is there any councillor seeking a leave of absence? Councillor McMullen.
Thank you. I'd like to seek a leave of absence from the 10th through to the 19th of April.
Thank you. Any further? Yeah, Councillor Oborne first, then Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you. May I please request a leave of absence from Friday the 1st to Tuesday the 5th of April inclusive?
Thank you. Councillor O'Donnell.
Yes, I would like to ask for a leave of absence from the 25th of March to the 30th of March, and also 11th of April to the 22nd of April, please.
Thank you. Any other councillors seeking leave of absence? If not, I'd ask somebody to move that we approve those leave of absence. Moved by Councillor Chambers, second Councillor De Haas. I put the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried 9-0. We move on then to announcements by the President presiding without discussion. There is nil. Declarations of members' interest is item 6. Declarations of financial interest. Are there any councillors declaring financial interest? Councillor Chambers.
I'd like to declare a financial interest in item 16.1, a financial interest as I own an IGA store.
Thank you. Next one, Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest, financial interest in 12.1.6, development application for a holiday house, as I own a holiday house.
Thank you. Next declaration of financial interest. Councillor De Haas.
I'd like to declare a financial interest in 16.1 as I am the owner of a small business in town.
Thank you. Any other declarations of financial interest? Councillors, I'll announce mine. I have a financial interest declaration on item 17.1. The issue is relating to the Myrup Fly-in estate. I've signed an expression of interest to purchase an undeveloped property in that estate. Any further declarations of financial interest? If not, we move on then to proximity interest. Are there any proximity interests that the councillors wish to declare? Okay, Councillor De Haas.
I'd like to declare a proximity interest in 12.1.1 as I own a property in Nelson.
Thank you. Councillor Graham, you indicated?
Yeah, on the same item, 12.1.1, local planning amendment 8, because I own land in or adjacent to a number of the items.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Declare a proximity interest in item 12.1.1 as I lease a property within the scheme.
Thank you. Councillor Oborne.
I declare a proximity interest in item 12.1.1 as I own property in Sinclair, which is in one of the mapped areas referred to in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Flanagan.
I declare an interest in item 12.1.1 as I own a property adjacent to one of the planning areas that are listed in the planning amendment.
Thank you. Any further declarations? Councillor McMullen.
I'd like to also declare a proximity interest in item 12.1.1 as I own or lease property in the affected area, and I would like to also declare another Proximity interest for item 16.1, application for short-term adjustment to retail trading hours as I own a business adjacent to the applicant.
Councillor Chambers?
Also declare a proximity interest in item 12.2.1, which is the request to remove street trees as my wife owns a property that's listed as one of the supporters for that letter that was sent to council.
Thank you. Any other proximity interest, councillors? Okay, we move on then to declarations of impartiality interests. Are there any declarations of impartiality interest? Councillor Oban.
I declare an impartiality interest again in 12.1.1 because I attend a local church and there's a places of worship item to be addressed in that scheme amendment.
Thank you. Any further declarations? Mr. Walker?
Through the Chair, I declare impartiality in item 12.1.3, request to refund planning fees for the Esperance Bay Yacht Club as I'm a member of the Esperance Bay Yacht Club.
Thank you. Any further declarations of impartiality? No further declarations. Thank you very much for councillors. We'll have to remember all those as we move through. Certainly impartiality interests don't require us to leave the chamber, but the declarations of financial interest and proximity interest do. Thank you for your declarations. We now move on to item 7, the public question time. Opportunities for members of the public to ask questions of council. And now, to do that, I'd ask that you come forward to the lectern at the end and we will take your questions present time. So I have first one I have up is Terry Campbell, home care question. Is that correct, Terry?
The questions I asked during the last ordinary council meeting have not been answered fully, and I am now requesting that the council examine the questions I put to Mrs. Phillips when seeking further clarification, as Mrs. Phillips did not feel it was appropriate to respond to an individual. I have condensed the questions for clarity, but both Mrs. Phillips and Mr. Burge have a copy of the original questions, and I'm happy to provide them if requested. Number 1. Please provide clarification surrounding who is undertaking the review of remuneration levels mentioned in your reply, if this is being done by an external third party and in consultation with the existing workforce. Number 2, as per the current job advertisement, penalty rates are not offered for casual staff. Can you please explain why this is the case and how the decision not to offer penalty rates was made? Number 3, considering there is a clear and identified need for staff and the fact that offering job security is a well-known strategy for both attracting and retaining staff, can you please clarify why the current job advertisement is for casual positions and not permanent part-time? 4, can you please confirm if the extensive training you mention in your response is referring to the industry standard nationally accredited training, such as Certificate 3 in Individual Support, or in-house non-accredited training? 5, is anyone exploring options for traineeships utilising the local TAFE? And 6, can you please explain why exit interviews are not conducted with all home care staff? I also ask that the council examine what has changed over the last 6 and 12-month periods regarding the Shire of Esperance's approach to Esperance home care staffing issues. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your questions, Mrs. Campbell, and your questions will be answered if you are providing a list as you've stated. But I will say that in regards to the remunerations, that we cannot make any comments on remunerations at the present time because the Shire's in the middle of a enterprise bargaining arrangement, and until that is finalised, we can't make any statements at all. But that's just the only answer I'll give you at this stage. The other items will be answered in due course by the staff, appropriate staff, in relation to those matters. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Dr. Newkirk.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope this is audible. The first question is to do with the chart and information on page 144. It deals with the cash investment as of the 28th of February. This question shouldn't come as a total surprise. In the February meeting, I questioned some of the detail. This pie chart still shows CBA at 81%, which is now over the limit of what is being accepted by council as the standard for investments, which says that the maximum shall be 80%. I noted in the charts that, and I'll compare it to the chart provided on the 31st of January, where it was deemed that investment with Westpac was 10% and with MBA was 9%. Actually, the amount hasn't changed. They are about 9.5%. And I wonder why, because there was some change in the investments where there was money that came out of CBA, was moved again into CBA rather than into another institution to modify the holdings.
Okay, thank you. Do I pass the question to Mrs.
Baxter? Yes.
Mrs. Baxter? Are
Through
you?
you. Yes.
That's okay? All right, good.
Through you, Chair, I'll have to take that on notice and get back to you on that. Mr.
Thank you.
Newkirk.
I mean, it's not very serious, and I think it needs to be modified over time. And if the officers can give an indication of how they wish to get into line with the policy, I think that would be quite appreciated.
Okay. You got another question, Mr.?
Yes, I've got a question.
Dr. Newkirk?
Regarding the minutes of the local recovery committee that has now been disbanded. And I note those minutes are on page 223 in your notes. I noticed that on page 225, and I mean this was in August 2021, so it's quite a while ago. I noticed that it says there that there was at that time 28,000 unallocated, and in that meeting $2,454 was endorsed for a certain course. I just wonder if you could advise what has happened to the remaining funding.
Okay, I presume it's still held in trust, but I'll... Yeah. So Mrs. Baxter, do you wish to answer that question, or the CO?
I don't have a lot to offer at the moment, other than it would be held in trust, but I'll get back to you. I'll take that on notice.
It's still there and still available for that purpose. Yeah.
The reason for the question was that the money was provided for a certain purpose, and I just want some reassurance that it indeed will be applied to that purpose, rather than that it sits in an account and then later on just goes somewhere totally else.
Dr. Newkirk, could I suggest to you that there hasn't been an application for funding within the guidelines that we had previously for this money, so it sits there and for that very purpose in case someone comes forward with a purpose that relates to the COVID. And bear in mind, IGA gave it to us for COVID recovery quite clearly. They gave an amount of money to the Shire of Westminster and to the Shire of Dundas for the very same reasons. Now, we had a requirement that they put in applications, the various groups put in applications, and the various subcommittees took those, assessed those applications and recommended payments to a variety of different groups at different times. But it's probably come to an end because the money hasn't come to an end, but the applications have come to an end.
Well, seeing that there is still funds that can be allocated, maybe Shire should put out a notice to the public, maybe in the Shire newsletter, saying, hey, look, guys, if anyone is suffering, and the clearly are people still suffering from the mandate, etc., that they advise and maybe make an application for these funds.
Okay, well, this is public question time. Thank you for your statement.
Okay, all right. Well, then come to another question, and this is related to happenings that were, or a question that was put in the annual electors meeting. The question number one that I posed was that the Ratepayers Association has some questions which they would like the Shire to hear before the rates are determined for the next financial year. And it goes on, I stated that the Ratepayers Association wishes to understand how much discretional funding will be set aside for community strategic projects in the budget. The answer that you gave is that you took the question on notice to allow Shire staff to gather information in order to give a detailed and informed response in writing. To date, I haven't received any written response. I also would like to link this issue with a listed council priority, in particular item N16, Pink Lake feasibility on page 188 in your notes. It reminds me of the forlorn tourists that stare at a non-pink Pink Lake, and I see them daily. They pile up there in the car park, they look at the notices and then wander off, and I wonder what that does to their overall experience of Esperance as a tourist attraction. At the annual electors meeting last year, I proposed, or I suggested, that a simple lookout near Lake Warden may help. That would be something that is of low cost and that could be done now. And it will bridge a gap that exists, as it could be years before what is currently done in a feasibility study actually gets our Pink Lake back. So the three questions I have: when can we expect a written response? Can a lookout at Lake Warden be included in the coming budget? And can a Pink Lake be included in the community strategic plan that is being developed?
Okay. Thank you for that, Dr. Newkirk. I could say to you that we can put a lookout to Lake Warden, but we can't call it Pink Lake. It must be Lake Warden, which is pink at this particular time. So that's the only way we can deal with it. I've certainly had people tell me it was a simple solution, just change the names of the lake. But I don't think that would be an agreeable outcome for anybody. It might have saved significant money, but there's still, the Shire is still looking, as you have pointed out, to endeavour to start the trial process in regards to testing to see if we can move water from Lake Warden to Pink Lake in the trial process, but we're looking to see if we can get some financial support for this going forward. So,
Thank you.
is that all?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. Any other members of the public who wish to ask questions? Okay, then I take it we have question time is finished. We move on with the agenda, councillors, and so we go back into the now the business section of the agenda, and we go to local planning scheme number 24, amendment number 8. And I don't know if you have any questions at this stage to Mr. Henley.
Public addresses and declarations.
My apologies, I jumped the gun there. There's no public addresses? There's no petitions in? Okay, we go to item 10 as the confirmation of the minutes. Councillors, is someone prepared to move the confirmation minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of February 2022? Moved by Councillor O'Donnell, seconded by Councillor Horan. It's moved and seconded. Is it requiring debate? No debate, I put to the vote. Those in favour? Against? That's carried 9-0. And we move on to the delegates' reports without discussion. We have the list on the computer board. And we have firstly Councillor Oborne. Do you have anything to add to that, Councillor Oborne? Councillor Flanagan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to add attendance at the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group meeting on the 21st of March 2022.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Councillor O'Donnell.
As table, thank you.
Councillor Graham. Councillor De Haas. Thank you. Councillor Horan. Councillor McMullen. Okay, thank you. It's only mine left, is it? Councillor Chambers.
As tabled, but I'd just like to add a note in regards to the handover of the equipment that was given to the Esperance Shire from Department of Fire and Emergency Services. There was 2 heavies and 4 light tankers and a utility vehicle that was also given to the State Emergency Services. The equipment will be greatly appreciated by the guys that are on the ground. It'll give us way more flexibility and ability to deal with the fires in future.
Thank you. And councillors mine are listed there, and I've endeavoured to just list the numbers of outside committees that I might have attended, and not the ones where, the formal committees of council. So there's a list there, and also I'd like to support what Councillor Chambers has said about the new fire trucks that have been provided. I just think it was a $2.1 million, I wouldn't call it windfall, I would call it just a contribution from state government that is going to certainly assist our volunteers. We know that we've been through problems in the past with equipment that our volunteers have got, and the Department of Fire and Emergency Services certainly have taken note of that, and they have provided us with a number of vehicles to address issues. They've also responded to the coroner's report from the 2015 fires by putting the 4 light units spread around our Shire area, so I think it was a great outcome on that day.
Just one point on that, if I may, the Commissioner is Darren Clem, not Darren West.
Is that your fault, or is it our officer's fault? Okay, that's edited correctly. Now, councillors, we move on now to the matters requiring a determination of council, item 12.1.1. Councillors, we can't deal with this. There's been 5 councillors that have declared, 6 councillors have declared either a financial interest or a proximity interest, and so this matter has to wait until we find a way that we can process it. We would not have a quorum if all those councillors moved out of the chamber. We just haven't got a quorum, so there's no point in going through the process of asking councillors to leave while this item comes up. Okay? So we move on then to item number 12.1.2, proposed naming of Reserve Force 41097, and the item's on page 27, and the recommendation is on page 33. Are there any questions you might have to Mrs. Phillips or Mr. Henley in regards to this item? Yes, Mr. Graham. Councillor Graham.
Yes, Chairman, just like to ask, we received an email that's not in the agenda that has basically influenced the way that we handle this, in the way that the state have basically made the decision, and I just asked whether that can be tabled as public information. Will we? Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Any other questions you might have to the staff? If not, is the councillor prepared to move the recommendation? Put our hands up. No movers to the motion. Moved Councillor Flanagan, seconded Councillor McMullen. Do you wish to read the motion, please?
Thought that was anyway. I move the officer's recommendation that council accept the proposal to formally name reserve 41097 as Dullarup Wudja Park. Request Landgate to support the application of the proposed name change to the reserve, and subject to approval, install signage to reflect the name of Dullarup Wudja Park.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Flanagan, and I already have a seconder to the motion. So, Councillor Flanagan, I'll ask you to speak to the motion.
As alluded to by Councillor Graham, and acknowledging the information contained in the officer's report and the submissions received, I don't believe that council has any other option but to support the recommendation insofar as what's contained in the email, and I won't go to explain what that is. Thank you.
Thank you. The second of the motion wish to speak. I should ask for, is there a speaker against the motion? The second of the motion, Councillor McMullen, do you wish to speak to it?
Very, very briefly, I mean, I think Councillor Flanagan covered most of this. I mean, to be honest, this decision has more so been made by Landgate. I guess I just wanted to point out that we're not renaming the actual Duke of Orleans Bay itself. The Duke of Orleans Bay will remain, so the impact to businesses in that region that actually use that namesake won't necessarily be affected. It's just the reserve itself. At the moment, the reserve is colloquially known as the Duke of Orleans, but it doesn't actually have a name associated to it, so we're not renaming it. It was never done in the first place, so we're essentially fixing a very, very old and dated error and giving this reserve its first ever name.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against? Or an amendment? There's no speakers against or no amendment. I'll put to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against? That is carried, 9 votes to 0. Councillors, we move on then to item 12.1.3, request to refund planning fees. The item is on page 52, recommendations on page 54. Are there any questions you might have on this item to Mr. Henley or Mrs. Phillips? No questions? Somebody prepared to move the motion then? Moved by Councillor Oborne, seconded by Councillor Graham. It's moved and seconded. Would you wish to read the motion, please, Councillor Oborne?
I move that council refund the development application fee for application 10.2022.4991.1 for the proposed marina development undertaken by the Esperance Bay Yacht Club Incorporated on a portion of Reserve 28207 and portion of Lot 322 on Plan 416487.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Oborne and seconded by Councillor Graham. So you can speak to the motion now, Councillor Oborne.
This is a significant community-driven project. Listed on page 53 are the multiple benefits to the broader public in the community, and I think it's important that we continue to support this project the way we have already been. And I think that, you know, their point about the economic climate they're trying to produce a project of this scale in is challenging, and this is a small way that we can help.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against the motion? The seconder, you wish to speak in favour of the motion, Councillor Graham? Is there a speaker against or an amendment? No speakers against or no amendment. I'll put the motion to vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried 9-0. Councillors, we now go on to item 12.1.4, a request to support the position on Esperance white shark attack response. The item is on page 56 and the recommendations on page 58. Is there any questions you might have on this item to Mr. Burge or to Mrs. Phillips? Any questions? There's no questions. Is there someone prepared to move the recommendation? Councillor Chambers?
I'm prepared to move that council provide a letter of support to Ocean Safety and Support Group, supporting their position on Esperance white shark attack response, version 3, June 2021, and request the Minister for Fisheries and the Premier of Western Australia to visit Esperance to meet with key representatives and to implement adequate local responses to serious public safety threats posed by sharks in accordance with state government guidelines.
Moved by Councillor Chambers. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Oborne. Councillor Chambers, I ask you to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we've seen an increased number of attacks here, but I don't think we've seen an increased response to those attacks or an increased response in any way to help mitigate the issue. I think anything that we can do to help mitigate and to help respond to those attacks and give some form of security to the ocean users of Esperance will go a long way forward to helping the tourism aspect of Esperance and just people's safety in general.
Okay, is there a speaker against the motion? No speakers against, so we'll give Councillor Oborne the opportunity to speak in favour if she wishes.
Thank you, Mr. President. All they're asking for is the state government to follow and implement their own published guidelines. I'd like to take this opportunity to commend Mitch Capelli and the group for their work in this space over many years now, and to agree with Councillor Chambers that Esperance is overrepresented in shark attack statistics, and I support the call for Deep Herd and Fisheries to build local capacity in our isolated community. As an example, Cottesloe got action immediately in Perth. One attack, one immediate action. Esperance has had one in 2017, two in 2020 and one just recently with nothing. Catching and relocation of aggressive sharks isn't a cull, but it's an important step to protect ocean users from an ongoing threat. And public safety, in my opinion, has become a political football, and the current state government needs to catch it and kick a goal for the Esperance community.
Thank you, Councillor Oborne. Is there a speaker against or an amendment? No amendments, no speakers against. I take it you're ready to vote. I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried 9-0. We move on then to item 12.1.5, development application, outbuilding shed, Stable Road. This item is on page 67, and the recommendations on page 70 and counting. Are there any questions you might have on this one to Mrs. Phillips or Mr. Henley? Any questions? No questions? I'll ask if somebody's prepared to move the recommendation. Councillor Horan,
Yeah, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation that council approve development application 10.2022.4946.1 for an outbuilding shed at a lot 83790 Stable Road, Chadwick, subject to the following conditions 1 through to 9 and the following advice notes 1 through to 5. Thank you.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Horan. Is someone prepared to second the motion? Seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Horan, you can speak to your motion.
Yes, generally I'm against oversized sheds, but this is exactly where it should be, I believe, out further out and not in town itself, the sticks. And I'm also of the opinion that rather than have stuff flying around about the place, all the guys' toys and all the rest of the stuff, boats and everything, if it can be put into a shed and out of sight, I think it's the way to go, especially out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against? No speaks against. Seconder, councillor O'Donnell, do you wish to speak in favour?
Only to say there's no one's against this building of the shed, so I don't see any problem with this going ahead with the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against or an amendment? Put to the vote, those in favour. Against, that is carried 9-0. Okay, councillors, we then move on to item 12.1.6, development application change of use for a dwelling to holiday house. Councillor Graham has declared a financial interest and left the chambers. Are there any questions you might have on this item to Mr. Henley or Mrs. Phillips? This item was laid on the table from, yes, Councillor, you've got a question, Councillor Oborne?
Yes, please. Is it possible to make it a condition of approval that the fire pit be removed before the first guest attends the property?
Through the chair, because the property management plan already contains that, it's probably covered by the property management plan.
I'm not confident in having it sitting there on the property that guests won't use it if it's there. And we did bring this up at the last meeting before we laid it on the table, so it concerns me that the owners heard our concerns about having a fire pit there and didn't remove it before bringing this back to council, so I don't have any confidence that it will get removed.
So Mrs. Phillips, you want to make comment?
Yeah, just into relation to that one, I guess, in terms of its inclusion as a condition, it would come down to whether it could be an enforceable condition or not, and the circumstances probably dictate that it wouldn't be an enforceable condition. However, if council saw fit to include such advice in the advice notes, that's something we could certainly follow through with.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Oborne? Any other questions you might have, councillors, to Mrs. Phillips or Mr. Henley?
I'll just make clarification.
Yes.
We won't be requiring 11 and 12 because I understand they've already been dealt with. So just council make note of that if you're wanting to move the officer's recommendation.
Okay, all right. So if there any, you understand what's being suggested there, councillors, so you can drop out 11 and 12 because they were the ones that we laid on the table for those to be addressed before we could move forward with it. So do you have any other questions to Mrs. Phillips or Mr. Henley? If not, someone prepared to move the recommendation? Councillor Oborne.
Can I please move basically the officer's recommendation with some amendments? The first being to delete items 11 and 12, which are redundant now, and to add a new 11, which is that the fire pit be removed before the first guest stays on the property.
Okay, and you're happy for the other items in the bin? Because we want to get clarification of your motion. And you've got the words up there on that subject, but is there... Okay, we understand that. And the advice notes as well.
Yeah, so essentially the whole officer's recommendation as it was written, minus the 2 redundant points, add the one about the fire pit.
Okay, thank you. So you're happy for that to be your motion? Thank you. So we could have you read right through it, but I'm doubtful if that's really necessary. I think you've explained what you want, so we understand what the motion is, councillors. Councillor Oborne's moved. Is there a seconder to the motion? Seconded by Councillor De Haas. Councillor Oborne, you can speak to the motion.
I'm not a fan of supporting these applications when the neighbours object, but in this instance, I understand that the applicant's parents actually live close by and will be the property managers, and so therefore there's a mechanism to monitor the complaints. I also understand from the report only 2 people can be accommodated in the property, so it's highly unlikely there's going to be big parties. But the fire pit was concerning to me. To have one in a declared bushfire prone area just didn't make sense to say you can't use it, but let's keep it there, because then that's just tempting fate. So yeah, I noticed point number 10 on page 79 was that the manager's mobile or the manager's details would be clearly displayed and advertised to the adjoining landowners, and that will facilitate the monitoring of complaints. So yeah, in this case, I'm prepared to move this motion.
Thank you. Is there someone who's prepared to speak against the motion? No councillor speaking against. Speaking in favour, the seconder, Councillor De Haas.
Can you just turn the microphone on?
I would just like to add to what Councillor Oborne has said, the fact that the owners have also complied with everything that has been asked, including a monitor for noise. So if there were any loud noise, parties, etc. in there, the alarm would go off and the people looking after the property would know about that. And it's such a small place that it wouldn't be successful as a long-term rental anyway. So with the amendment that Councillor Oborne has made, I'm quite happy to second that.
Okay, thank you. Can I just say, this isn't an amendment, we're not dealing with amendment. The substantive motion included the words that Councillor Oborne put in. So just get the words right up there. That's it. Okay, all right, so we understand it. It's been, the speaker's been in favour, and the seconder has spoken. Is there any speakers against now or any amendments? I'd just like to speak in favour of councillors. I think it's a very good addition. What Councillor Oborne has added in there adds to it, and it gives a very clear understanding that they can't operate the building until they remove that fire pit. And I don't think it's detracting from the building by taking it out of there, because if it's used for their own residents periodically and for holiday people in due course as a holiday home, I think that that's just a safe way to deal with it. So, any speakers? Any further speakers? Against? In favour? Amendments? No. Put to the vote. Those in favour. That is carried. 8 votes to nil. Call Councillor Graham back into the chambers. Councillor Graham, for your benefit, the motion has been carried with one addition in the amendment saying that the fire pit must be removed before there's occupancy in the building. Okay, councillors, we now move on to asset management, and that's item 12.2.1, request to remove I've jumped it. Adoption of a compliance policy. My apologies. Item 12.1.7, adoption of a compliance and enforcement policy. That's on page 93, and the motion's on 96. Now, I've got notes here to say that Mrs. Phillips had some comments to make to this before we move forward with it. So.
Yes, just Mr. President, just to highlight the fact that Council did receive a briefing in late December in relation to a range of high priority matters that will be requiring, I suppose, some attention within a reasonable time frame. Just proposing an additional resolution with the officer's recommendation, that is that essentially those current compliance and enforcement actions are reviewed in accordance with the substantive policy if it's adopted.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Phillips, any questions to get a full understanding of that, councillors? Any questions to Mrs. Phillips? Okay, you're ready to move on it then, are you? So, is there any other questions other than just that point 4 that's been added? No questions on it? Okay, then is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Oborne. Is the second? Oh, I should have asked you to read it first.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the officer's recommendation. Do you want me to read it out?
Yes, please.
That Council 1 adopt the compliance and enforcement policy. 2, delegate authority to the Chief Executive Officer to issue written directions under Section 214(3) of the Planning and Development Act 2005, in addition to general administrative powers pursuant to Section 4.1 of the Delegated Authority Register, and 3, undertake a community education program to proactively inform the Esperance community, businesses and stakeholders on the Shire's compliance and enforcement activities and requirements. 4, reassess all current compliance and enforcement action in accordance with the adopted policy and address matters accordingly.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Oborne. Is there a seconder to the motion? Councillor O'Donnell, thank you. And so you can speak to your motion, Councillor Oborne.
I'll keep it brief because we've had 2 briefings on this already, and for me the key was proportionate responses in a timely fashion, and I think this is a good policy. There's a mix of education, communication as a priority, and enforcement to reduce risks on behalf of our community. And I think the officers' briefing in December 21 highlighted for us some really high risk issues that might become time critical, and so point number 4 addresses that need.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against? Councillor Chambers.
Whilst I agree with points 1 to 3 and the work that we did, I can't agree with the recommendation as it sits with point 4. I believe that there is actions on the table that I think would have been better handled within that workshop period, just to find out exactly what the outcome and what the implication of having point 4 in there is.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Phillips, I think, no, we're in debate. I think I'll have to limit you to.
Sure, just a point of clarification.
Yes.
The intent is to bring those matters back to Council for action. It's just in the context of the delegated approval being given to the CEO, they can be addressed through operational matters, but the intent is to still bring those standing matters back to a briefing.
Okay, thank you for that, because I think it does say that adopt the compliance policy. I think it reassess all current compliance and enforcement actions. Would that be a better word there then? Does that confuse the motion? Mr. CEO, do you think of adding word council, which is the key point that was come out of that information?
Maybe we'll need to bring it back formally for council's consideration, which matters they want to discuss.
All right. Okay, I think that's a fair and reasonable way to go with it. Okay, so are we happy with that motion that the mover?
Well, is Councillor James happy with that motion? Is that changed? Because otherwise...
Well, yeah, he's speaking against it, so... But the mover and the second have to accept it.
Yeah. So I didn't move the second, so if they accept it, then that's what I've spoken against it. That's my objection.
Okay.
Oops. Okay. Yeah, no, could we put it back to the original, the way it was originally? Because if the amendment's not going to gather support from the objectors, then the amendment's not.
No, well, he spoke against it and used that. It wasn't, he didn't put up an amendment to it. He spoke against it, saying that's what we, point 4, missed the point, I think is what he was saying to us. And Mrs. Phillips explained that it was coming back to council. I said, well, we put that in there then to make sure it made that point clear. And so if you want it back to your original motion, it stays there. but that's why I had to ask you if you would accept it, and you're saying no. And the seconder is saying no. Who, the seconder was? Yeah. Okay. All right. So that gives Councillor Chambers opportunity later to amend it, or just vote against it, speak against it, and vote against it. Okay. So we've got a substantive motion there in front of us now, including point 4, and Councillor Oborne has spoken to it. Councillor Chambers, Councillor O'Donnell, you're the next speaker as the seconder to the motion. Do you wish to speak to it? Is there a speaker against? And I think because of the correction of it, if Councillor Chambers wants the right to speak against, I'll give him that opportunity. But is there any other councillors wanting to speak against it at this stage? Speaker in favour? Speaker against?
I'll just restate my objection against having point 4 in there. I think that it's items in the process that I think this is going to impact on. We don't do this to anything else. We don't. When we put a policy in place, we don't go back and grandfather anything. We don't go back and look at previous stuff, and I just don't understand why we're doing it with this particular motion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker in favour? Speaker against or any amendments? I'll give the right of reply to Councillor Oborne. That'll close the debate.
That's a valid point about whether we do or don't grandfather some things. I think in this case, the key for me is that the briefings we've received show a huge volume of compliance issues, which we could continue to use the limited staff we have and run dual processes of pre-2022 we're using these rules and post-2022 we're using these rules. Not enough staff, too many compliance issues, too confusing. I think this brings clarity and consistency. It's proportionate, it's timely.
Okay, thank you. That closes the debate. Councillors, I put it to the vote. Those in favour. Oh, this requires an absolute majority, councillors. So I put it to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against. That is carried 8 votes to 1. Thank you. We move on then to asset management, item 12.2.1, request to remove street trees at Randall Street. Okay, proximity interest is declared by Councillor Chambers. So we didn't have any other proximities, did we, on this subject? Okay, so are there any questions you might have on this item, councillors? Should I say that the item's on page 105 and the recommendations is on 109. Councillor Oborne.
I just wondered when, I don't know what Mr. Buckman said to each individual councillor, but I know to me he mentioned the word good neighbour repeatedly throughout his admonitions as to why we should remove the trees. And he was talking about, if you were our physical next door neighbour, how would you help? How would you respond? And I just wondered if, what is our capacity as a good neighbour to remedy some of the leaf litter issues for those elderly residents on the street? Because it's my understanding the majority of them, I don't know who I'm asking the question of, maybe Mr. Walker, the majority of the residents are elderly, and I just wonder what our capacity is to do something like an annual gutter clean before winter starts so that their gutters will work properly without our leaves in them, or installing gutter guards for them or something, just understanding that they're elderly and maybe not able to get up there themselves.
Yeah, so through the chair, the Dividing Fence Act and stuff comes into play there. Pretty much if it lands on your side then, or you can chop it, but there's no requirement, there's no legal instrument saying you have to do anything on your side. I would be very cautious about setting a precedent. If you do this for one house, you'll be doing this for every house in Aspirants and further afield. I think it would be up to each individual resident, in all honesty, to determine what's appropriate for their house and invest in their house.
Okay, any other questions, councillors, that you might have? Staff? Yeah, councillor O'Donnell.
So presently, does the Shire plant tulip trees as per se on any property at this present time?
No.
It's not a desired.
There's no desire to plant more tulip trees. They're too much risk. They're a nice, fast-growing tree, but there's too many issues and problems with them going forward. So, ideally, we'd like to replace them gradually over time with more appropriate species. That's our current approach. The guys in the Parks and Reserves teams have appropriate species that they work out what is appropriate in that street tree context, but there's no way we can go out and just replace them all overnight. Otherwise, you'd have a very desolate landscape in Esperance.
So the reason why you wouldn't plant these is, what's his reason? Was it unsafe? Is there an unsafe aspect to that?
They're obviously a fairly large tree, and they probably not appropriate as a street tree in, I guess, that longer term sense. Not saying that we should go and cut them all down now, but because they're such a large tree. The problem is when you start pruning a mature tree, you then weaken that tree. So once you start that process, then it's very costly to continue to start pruning that and to maintain that value, because if you prune, say, one large limb, then you actually structurally affect the rest of the tree. So, yeah, yeah.
Okay, any other questions, councillors? Councillor McMullen?
Quickly, and I think this follows on from Councillor Oborne. Mr. Walker, did we, from memory, I believe the council was committing to at least run the street sweeper down Randall Street in a more regular course to assist cleaning up some of the leaf litter, is that correct?
Yes, as per the council report there, we've recognised that we do need to put the street sweeper through that area and tidy up that footpath that runs between the tulip trees. So it's a better level service because there was deficient in that. And also recognising that we had to remove one tree and prune one back as per our policy. So yeah, it was identified as part of that process that we probably were below the level of service that we should be providing in that area.
Okay, all the questions answered? Okay, is someone then prepared to move the motion that is listed on page 109?
Mr. President, can I move an alternate motion?
Yes, I guess I can test that.
Can I move a motion that this matter be laid on the table pending, or just in view of the fact that the relevant policy, which is referred to in this particular item, is actually subject to a proposed amendment under the item 12.3.2, reference number ASS019 street trees. And there was much discussion in relation to that particular item at the council briefing, and maybe the necessity to actually widen the scope of any review of that particular policy. And so I think that it would be premature to consider this matter in the context of the possibility of that policy being further reviewed. So that would be the reason why I'm proposing a motion for this matter to be laid on the table, subject to a further review of the street tree policy, and that the matter be considered once that policy has been finalised.
Okay, so have you got some words for a motion there? Councillor, we got it up here. Council will lay this item on the table to allow a review of the street tree policy in view of... Okay. Well, it's Councillor Flanagan's words, so let's get them right. Councillor Flanagan, have you got a...
Offer a small amendment. Instead of saying to lay this item on the table to allow for the street tree review, to lay this item on the table till after the review of the street tree policy, because if that's what you're trying to do, is review that policy first.
Councillor Flanagan's, it's Councillor Flanagan's motion, so I want him, everybody's given him advice what should be in it. But I want him to get the words that he wants up there to.
Lay this item on the table, following the review of the street tree policy, and to be considered, well,
you've got to give a time period, basically, to lay it on the table. If you're saying that you want to lay it on the table until after we've confirmed our street tree policy, just say it in those words. How are you going, Councillor Flanagan?
I'm just trying to make sense of what's actually been put up there. So the council laid this item on the table until after the confirmation.
After review. Street tree policy.
We have a street tree policy right here.
So this is probably so the point being made, and I guess that's probably the discussion that I've had leading into this, is that the street tree policy as proposed under item 12.3.2 wasn't sufficiently wide. The scope of that review, what didn't actually cover the issues or elements that relate to the matters that have been raised in relation to 12.2.1. So, in effect, it needs to be dealt with in concert with or complementary to that particular item.
Okay, so then, Councillor, you could say that this item lay on the table until the May Ordinary Council meeting, and then when we get to the next one, that we do a full review prior to the May full council meeting.
The issue is going to be you have to review the street tree policy first.
Yes.
And after that, then we can bring it back. Now, I'm not sure how long that's going to take. The council can't come to a determination on what the issue is with the current street tree policy. That could take a number of workshops for council to determine that.
Yep.
I don't know how long that will take.
Yep.
So we could bring the item back and council could still not consider it because they haven't reviewed the street tree policy appropriately.
I think that works from my perspective, because if you decide to approve the policy today, then we can bring back this item next month. If you approve an amendment to that and not include that policy when you do some briefings, once you adopt that policy, we'll bring back this item the next month.
That's the process I'm trying to just get some words for. I mean, so there's an understanding that we're going to do a review of our street tree policy, and so it's until after the review of the street tree policy.
It could be a two-step motion. One that council one, review the street tree policy ASS 019, and two, lay this item on the table until after the review of that.
Yep.
That policy. Is that
After that policy has been endorsed by the review and endorsement by council of that policy.
Reviewed and endorsed by council, yeah.
And then you've got that council one.
Yep.
That council one. Normally we'd just say that council that number one, review the street tree policy, and two, lay the item for one.
Yep. And lay this item on the table until after review and endorsement of the street tree policy.
So endorsement needs to be, not endorse, it will be endorsement.
Makes
So
sense
endorsement
now.
by council of the street tree policy. After endorsement by council.
We're close now, councillor
Yes,
Flanagan.
I'm happy with that. So, would you like me to read the motion? again?
Yes, yeah, this is your motion.
That the council review the street tree policy ASS colon 019 and 2, lay this item on the table until after the review and endorsement of council of the street tree policy ASS colon
Okay.
019, so there's a 0 needs to be put in for that.
Right, okay, so you happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
So it's been moved by councillor Flanagan. Is it seconded by councillor De Haas? You can speak to it, councillor Flanagan.
I think I've actually outlined pretty clearly the premise and the logic that sits behind my amendment insofar as it would be premature to consider an item prior to the completion of or endorsement by council of a review of the policy. Thank you.
Okay, councillor Flanagan spoken in favour of his motion. Is there a seconder to the motion? I've got a seconder. Is there a speaker against the motion? Councillor De Haas, you can speak to the motion as a seconder.
I had spent many hours trying to think how to get around that, but you've given it the perfect way. So, so thank you, councillor Flanagan. I'm quite happy to second that.
Okay, is there a speaker against? Speaker in favour? No further speakers, no amendments? Put to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried. 8 votes to nil. Call councillor Chambers back into the chambers, please. I haven't had a chance to say that before. Councillor Chambers, we've taken a different direction on this subject. We are going to review our street tree policy first, and then we'll bring this item back after that's been endorsed and consider it then. Okay, so then we move on, councillors, to corporate and community services, item 12.3.1, delegated authority, register updates, fines, penalties and imprisonment. This is on page 113 of your agenda. Are there any questions you might have to Mrs. Baxter on this item? There's no questions?
Through you, Chair, based on the previous discussion,
Yep.
we actually need to amend this recommendation and I'd suggest an alternative recommendation B,
Right.
that council adopt the asset management policies inclusive of amendments, sorry, wrong one? Beg your pardon. Oh, the next one, yes, sorry, yeah, hold my horses.
Okay. So are there any questions on this item to Mrs. Baxter? There's no questions on this item. I'll take it you are ready to deal with it. So then someone prepared to move the draft recommendation? Councillor O'Donnell, you'd like to read it, please, Councillor O'Donnell?
Move the opposite recommendation that council endorse delegation 17.1 fines, penalties and infringement notices.
Enforcement Act 1994, inclusive of amendments, inclusions and deletions.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor O'Donnell. Someone would second the motion. Councillor Chambers has seconded. Councillor O'Donnell, you can speak to the motion.
I don't think I need to speak to the motion, I think it's self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the speaker against? Seconder wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Chair.
Is there a speaker against or an amendment? this requires an absolute majority, councillors, so I'll put the motion to vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried, 9 votes to nil. We move on then to item 12.3.2, which is a policy review on asset management. Now, this is on page 116, and I think that Mrs. Baxter is listed here to make some comments on this one. I'm by my notes, so. Bit of confusion there. Okay.
So unleash those horses and now update the recommendation to this item as described. That council adopt the asset management policies inclusive of amendments, inclusions and deletions as reviewed, with the exception of AAS 019 street tree policy, which is to be put to subsequent council meeting for endorsement after a briefing with council has occurred.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, any questions, Joe, on this subject? I mean, you can see it dovetails with the previous matter that we dealt with. Any issues, any questions you might want to put to Mrs. Baxter?
I'd like to
Yes, Councillor? Yeah.
put an amendment there, or?
Well, I haven't called
Move it
for
with
a
an
motion yet.
Okay.
No, so if there are any questions, if you've got a question to Mrs. Baxter, if you want to highlight something.
Oh, okay, Mrs. Baxter, with the road verge development, where it says obligation and owners and occupiers to be responsible for the road verge, how is that going to be enforced?
Through you, Chair, I'll defer to the Director of Asset Management.
Obviously, we're not going to go and penalise people and the like. I guess it's just setting our expectation that it's your road verge and you are responsible for maintaining it to your level of service. With those changes in the policy, we'll just make it clear in that it still means we won't ever maintain or do anything to that verge. It's not like they're responsible for the cost if we go and do something. It's just if they want to maintain it to their service level.
So, why the wording in the, why not just encourage the homeowner occupier to?
Why the wording is it gives our officers, so when we deal with the public, the actual council position that if you want to look up and maintain this verge, then it's your responsibility. Well, if you want a certain level of service, it's your responsibility instead of them coming back and going, I want you to mow my verge every week, where we can't do that. So having this in a council policy actually gives our officers, I guess, that authority to say that back. At the moment we go, it's encouraged, it's that. It'd be nice that we can just go, if you want this level of service, it's your responsibility.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor O'Donnell?
No, not entirely. No, I would like to make an amendment, please.
Okay, all right. We'll see where we go with that then. So this is the recommendation that Mrs. Baxter's brought forward to you, that to adopt the asset management policy inclusive of amendments, inclusions and deletions as reviewed, with the exception of AAS 019 street tree policy, which is to be put to a subsequent council meeting for endorsement and briefing of council, etc., as we talked about. So there's, we're not talking about the street tree policy here, we are talking about all of those items that were within the discussion. You understand that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so is there any, if there's no more questions to Mrs. Baxter or Mr. Walker, someone prepared to move that motion as such? Yeah, well, give us your, you can have a substantive motion if you want to change some words in there.
Okay. Like the officer's recommendation that council adopt the asset management policy.
Yeah. It's your motion.
Yeah.
So.
Like adopt the council adopt the asset management policy inclusive of
council meeting for endorsement after reconvened council has occurred, with the removal of the sentence in ASS maintenance of the street verde landscape and apart from the street tree at present is the responsibility of the owner occupier of the property adjoining the street verde. We would like that sentence removed. Although others make sense, just not that sentence. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah. So let's get the wording right up there. Just tell us if it's not right, please.
Move of the sentence in ASS 08, the maintenance of the street verde landscaping, apart from a street tree at present. Is the responsibility of the owner and or occupier. Apart from the street tree at present. Is the responsibility of the owner and or occupier of the property adjoining the street verde. Property adjoining street verde.
Okay, now you're happy with the wording that's there now, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So we've had a fair go to read it out. As long as you're happy with it. Okay, is there a seconder to the motion? This is the substantive motion. Been moved. Is there a seconder to the motion? The third and last time, is there a seconder to the motion? Motion lapses for the want of a seconder. We go back to our own substantive motion, the original substantive motion. So we've got that one. The motion lapses for want of a seconder, please. That one.
Did we have an original motion? What? It was the original motion, so there's only an officer's recommendation.
Yeah, okay, all right. So we go back to the officer's recommendation, or an alternate motion if you wish. So, councillors, is someone prepared to move the officer's recommendation? Councillor Flanagan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I move the officer's recommendation that council adopt the asset management policies inclusive of amendments, inclusions and deletions as reviewed, with the exception of ASS 019 street tree policy, which is to be put to a subsequent council meeting for endorsement after a briefing with council has occurred.
Okay, so we've got that wording up there, right, have we? Moved by Councillor Flanagan. Is it seconded? No, it's been read. Yes, seconded, Councillor De Haas. Thank you. So, Councillor Flanagan, speak to your motion.
I think it's pretty straightforward, as discussed in great detail with the previous item, and that would be sensible to review that policy and to deal with it as we've outlined.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against motion? Councillor O'Donnell.
Okay, so I would like to speak against the motion only because of the ASS 008 road verge development. The reason why I wanted that sentence removed is it just makes the owner morally and legally bound to that directive. and there is people out there and owners and occupiers that are, that have no means or ability to maintain their road verge. Mr Walker has said that he won't enforce it, so I will keep him at his word on that. But I'm just going to say that that is the reason why. And we also voted it down in December 2019, that very sentence. So just letting you all know we have voted it down before in the past for that reason.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor De Haas, do you wish to speak in favour?
Nothing to add to it, thank you.
Okay, is there a speaker against? Speaker in favour? Or an amendment? No amendments? Okay, so I take it you're ready to vote, councillors. Those in favour of the motion, please show. Against? The motion is carried 8 votes to 1. Move on now to James Street Cultural Precinct. Is that the one we're up to? Yep. Item 12.3.1, James Street Cultural Precinct Development Plan. The item's on page 118 and the motion's on 121. So are there any questions you might have on this item, please, to the CEO? Any questions to the CEO on this item? I take it you're ready to deal with the motion, so is there any councillor prepared to move the officer's recommendation?
Mr. President, would it be possible to move an amendment to that motion?
Well, I mean, if you want to put a motion on the table,
yeah, if I could.
Well, it's not an amendment. It's a standing
It's a
motion.
standing motion.
It's different to that, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Councillor Flanagan, if you've got it.
Okay. If I could just, following that, council endorse the attached James Street Cultural Precinct Development Plan, then add to acknowledge the submissions received and endorse the accompanying actions as detailed in the officer's comments to be followed up in relation to the James Street Cultural Precinct Development Plan, then alter the numbering to reflect the addition of that clause.
Okay, so that's an addition to the card.
Acknowledge the submission received. Yep. In relation to the James Street Cultural and endorse the accompanying actions. As detailed in the officer's comments. To be followed up in relation to the James Street Cultural Precinct Development Plan. Development Plan.
And then the numbers realign from there on. Okay, Councillor Flanagan, is that what you're looking for?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Are you all happy to move that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, is there a seconder to the motion? Seconded by Councillor Chambers. It's moved and seconded. Councillor Flanagan, you can speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reason for the change is just to reflect that under attachment B, submissions received from final advertising period that was provided under separate cover, there was a column of officers' comments in relation to or reflecting or giving actions to the submissions that were made, and I think it was important to officially endorse that as a council in addition to the James Street Cultural Precinct Development Plan. It's just something that needed to be dealt with. Thank you, Mr. President. Yep, thank you.
Okay, so it's speaker in favour. Is the speaker against that motion as it stands? Seconder wish to speak to it, Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I agree with what Councillor Flanagan added to the, or put up in the motion. And I also like to state that I think this is an extremely important project going forward for Esperance. There is an absolutely fantastic piece of land down there that I think is begging to be better utilised. And after the extensive process that we've had through community consultation and consultants here looking at this, the outcome that we've come up with I think is absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to see some of the stuff begin. Whether it happens in my lifetime or not, it's another question. But it certainly is a step in the right direction, and I really do look forward to it taking shape. Thank you.
Thank you. So speaker against? Speaker in favour? Speaker against or an amendment? Take it you're ready to vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that's carried 9 votes to nil. We then go to item 12.3.4, the lease area amendment request from the Gibson Football Club. That's on page 122, councillors, and the recommendations on 124. So, are there any questions you might have to this one to Mrs. Baxter? No questions? Someone prepared to move it off as a recommendation or another motion? Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation that Council, subject to the Department of Land's approval, amend the lease area for the Gibson Football Club for a portion of the Reserve 25639, Lot 141 Star Street, Gibson, to include an area to the west of the existing lease area as outlined in Annexure B of this report, subject to 1, the lease variation fee being payable of $220 including GST, 2, the club maintaining vegetation on site to reduce fire risk, and 3, the club liaising with the Shire to obtain relevant approvals prior to any land clearing being undertaken on the site.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Chambers. Is it seconded? Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Chambers, you can speak to your motion.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, this is a piece of land that was handed back after one of the other clubs in Esperance didn't have a use for it. I think this is a great use for the football club to be able to utilise extra space, and hopefully will help them move forward in their endeavours.
Is there a speaker against? Second, I wish to speak in favour. Councillor O'Donnell.
No.
Is there a speaker against or an amendment? Put to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried. 9 votes to nil. Thank you. We go to page 127, Councillor, which is the item 12.3.5, Financial Services Report for February 2022. Do you have any questions to Mrs. Baxter on this one? If not, someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Chambers.
I'll move the officer's recommendation that Council receive the attached report entitled Monthly Financial Management Report incorporating the statement of financial activity for the month of February 2022.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Chambers. Second by Councillor O'Donnell. You wish to speak to it, Councillor?
Just quickly like to thank Mrs. Baxter for forwarding on the information that was requested at the agenda briefing. It certainly is an eye-opener when you sit down and look at the breakdown of what it costs to maintain our roads. Certainly gives me a far better understanding in regards to what's involved, and yeah, I thank you very much for that.
Is there a speaker against? Second is Councillor O'Donnell. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yes.
Is it in favour?
Yes. I'd like to thank and commend the staff for their the 81.33% on the local payments and local procurement. I think that's because at times it's been in the past it's been like 50%, so it's continually been 80+% for local buying and that sort of thing. So I think it's a very good outcome. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there a speaker against or an amendment? Not, I'll put to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried. 9 votes to nil. Let's move on then. We go to common seal usage, page 174. Is there any questions you have to Mr. Baxter on this one? Oh, Mr. Burge, sorry. Ask Mr. Burge. No. Okay, somebody prepared to move the officer's recommendation on this item? Moved by councillor O'Donnell, second by councillor Graham. You can read the
Sure. It's my
motion, please.
Officer recommendation that council receive the report titled The Shire of Westminster Common Seal Usage for the period of October 2021 to February 2022.
Move. Did you wish to speak to it? I've got a second. Okay, is there a speaker against? Councillor Graham, do you wish to speak to it?
No, just to add that that's probably one of the big important stampings is the jetty licence application to set us on a near future of history.
Okay, is there any speakers against the motion or an amendment? Put to the vote. Those in favour? Against? That is carried. 1 votes to nil. We move on then to the information bulletin on page 177. There any questions on the information bulletin? You've had your opportunity, I think, through the processes that we've had with our agenda briefing, but if there's any questions you might want to ask to councillors, to the senior staff on this one, you can. If not, I'll ask someone to move the motion as on page 177. Councillor O'Brien?
I move the officer's recommendation that council accepts 1, the information bulletin February 2022, 2, council priority summary February 2022, and 3, delegations discharge corporate resources.
Thank you. It's been moved by councillor O'Brien. Is there a seconder to the motion? Seconded by councillor De Haas. It's moved and seconded. Councillor O'Brien, did you have anything to say on this?
No, thank you, Mr. President.
Is there a speaker against? Councillor De Haas as a seconder. Do you wish to speak in favour of? Is there a speaker against or an amendment? No speakers against, and I'll put you to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried 9-0. We now go to the compliance audit report. This is item 13.1 on page 205 as I read my pages. So, is there any questions you might have on Mrs. Baxter on this item? No questions, and then we go to a motion for the endorsement of it. So over the page, on the page 206, there is a recommendation of the adoption. Someone prepared to move that? Councillor Flanagan has moved. You wish to just read it, please, Councillor Flanagan.
Mr. President, I move that I've got to find the actual recommendation. I'll read it.
Page 206 at the bottom.
Yep. So that council adopt the 2021 Shire of Esperance compliance audit return pursuant to Regulation 14, subsection 3 of the Local Government (Audit Regulations 1996.
Moved by Councillor Flanagan. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Councillor McMillan. It's moved and seconded. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor?
I would just like to commend staff in relation to their professionalism and diligence in ensuring that council actually is fully compliant. There were 2 minor items that she raised that were of non-compliance that in terms of materiality were fairly minor, and they've already been addressed. So yes, I'd just like to commend staff in relation to the work they've done. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there a speaker against? Councillor McMullen, you don't want to speak in favour of it? Okay. Could I just speak in favour to support the statements that were made by Councillor Flanagan, but particularly acknowledge the work done by Sarah Walsh. She does a huge amount of work to go through this and make sure it's all of the information is appropriate and dealt with, and if it's not dealt with, she makes sure it's dealt with before the report's finalised. So we'd thank her sincerely for her work. So councillors, we move on from there. Oh, we've got to take a vote on the motion, don't we? Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried. Thank you. Carried 9 votes to nil. So we go to minutes of the disbanded committees, page 219. Do you have any questions on this to Mr. Burge, CEO? No questions? So we have a motion then that confirm those minutes. Committees have been disbanded. Moved by Councillor O'Vaughan, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. It's moved and seconded. Councillor O'Vaughan.
I move that council confirm the following most recent minutes of a committee which has been disbanded. 1, the Local Recovery Committee, 17th of August 2021.
Thank you. Did you wish to speak to the motion now, Councillor? Because
Just to say that I know it's been a long time since that meeting was held, but rereading them in the agenda item this month, they are an accurate reflection of what happened in August last year.
thank you. Is there a seconder wish to? Sorry, is the speaker against? Seconder wish to speak? Councillor O'Donnell.
Can I just concur on what councillor O'Brien has said? Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers against or any amendments? Put to the vote. Those in favour, please show it is carried. And we move on then, councillors, to minutes of disbanded minutes of committees. So I think I'm in the right place, aren't I? Item 13.4, budget review on page 229.
Sorry, there's the minutes the committees put.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, 13.3, which is on page 236. Oh, that's better. 228 it is, isn't it? Yeah. So, councillors, is there any questions in regards to this information? There's no questions. There's a motion there on page 228. Certainly, Councillor McMullen.
Yep, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation that council accept the following unconfirmed minutes. 1, Audit Committee, 8th of March 2022.
And moved by Councillor McMullen. Is there a seconder? Second, Councillor Flanagan. Councillor McMullen, you can speak.
Oh, I don't think this item requires any discussion.
Is there a speaker against? No speakers against, no amendments. I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour? Thank you. That is carried and 9 votes to nil. Now we go on to the 13.4, which is the budget review, 2021-22 budget review, and on page 229 is the, I think I'm right there, 229 is the item. Are there any questions on this? Firstly, we get some movers and seconders for it. Is there any questions to Mrs. Baxter on this item? If not, there's a recommendation on page 236. So, is someone prepared to move that motion? Moved by Councillor McMullen.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation that council adopt the 2021-22 budget review.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor McMullen. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor De Haas. Councillor McMullen, you can speak to it.
I guess just wanted to, thank the staff for the enormous amount of work that they put into this one. Just the agenda item itself is about 6 pages long, but just it's worth noting. Sorry, my docs on tap is playing up a little bit. It's gone all fuzzy. I was going to read a key point. Rough figures. I mean, overall, the the mid-year budget estimate estimates that the Shire will be running at approximately a $6,500 deficit for an organisation that turns over approximately $50 million a year. It's not bad, so a credit to the staff for achieving such a result.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen. Is there a speaker against? Seconder, would like to speak to them, to the motion.
Just to reiterate what Councillor McMullen has said and to congratulate the staff.
Any speakers against or amendments? I put it, this requires an absolute majority, councillors. Budget review, so I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried 9-0. And now that concludes motions of which notice has been given. Members' question with or without notice. Now, we've got one late item, I believe, haven't we? Is that where it comes in here? Under 16. Urgent business, okay, urgent business, yeah. Motions with which notice has been given. Okay, no items for that. 15 is members' questions with or without notice. Any questions from members on any matter? Without notice. Thank you. So we move on from there. We go to item 16, urgent business approved by decision. And you've received it this evening, councillors. That was handed out, and I haven't got access to mine at the present moment. So much paper. Okay, so the application for short-term adjustment to retail trading hours is the item 16. So do you have any questions to...
So first of all, council need to accept whether they'll accept the item, and then you'll have an interest in it if they consider it.
Okay, so councillors, we have to, someone needs to move that we accept the item. Moved by Councillor Oborne, seconded by Councillor Flanagan, that we receive the item. Do you wish to speak to your motion, Councillor?
Simply to say that if we don't accept it now, Easter will come and go, and then it's a moot point.
Thank you. Speaker against receiving this item now? If not, we put it to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Against, that is carried 9-0. Now we're going to deal with it. Now the declarations need to move. So we have 3 councillors declaring interest in the item. So are there any questions you might have, councillors, to Mrs. Baxter on this item, or the CEO? Any questions? Self-explanatory? Okay, so if you're happy with it, someone prepared to move the officer's recommendation. Moved by Councillor Horan. You would like to read it, Councillor?
That council support the application to the Department of Commerce for the addition of April the 18th, 2022 between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. as additional retail trading hours in the Shire of Esperance.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Horan. Somebody prepared to second it? Seconded by Councillor Flanagan. Councillor Horan, you can speak to your motion.
I think it's a good move. I think everybody agree with me that trying to get to Woolies, the normal hours is bad enough, so it'd be good to have it. I would have liked to have seen it Sunday and Monday, but obviously Monday, and pity we couldn't get the coffee shop in there as well for the weekend. But no, I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
You, as speaker, is there a speaker against? Seconder wish to speak to it, Councillor Flanagan?
Only to add that it's an entirely sensible approach in relation to Easter being a major period of tourism for the town, and it's logical to actually extend trading hours to accommodate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against? Or an amendment? No speakers against, no amendment. I put to the vote. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4.
It should be 6.
6. Okay, so it's the motion is carried. 6 votes to 3. Call councillors. Is it? 6-0. Sorry, yes. Yeah, my apologies. 6, 3. 3 are out of the room, that's why. That's so bad. Okay, councillors, just to advise you that council supported the officer's recommendation motion on that item. Okay, so now we go to public question time. I'm bringing forward public question time, and there you go, it's your privilege, Dr. Newkirk. No further questions, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Now we've, councillors, somebody moved that we
Yep.
go behind closed doors?
And before we do, which he's gone, but I did forget a declaration before we go behind closed doors. For those of the public, I also declare a proximity to the Two Worker Camp Reserve because my cattle roam the land across the road. So that add to that, and I move that we go behind closed doors.
Right. Councillor Graham's moved that we go behind closed doors, seconded by Councillor O'Born. I'll put to the vote those in favour, councillors. That is carried by 9 votes to 0, that we go behind closed doors. explain that to the people online. I think I can have to follow through here somewhere and keep it in the right order. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Council dealt with 4 items in the behind closed doors matters, and we have made decisions in regards to those. The first item was regarding a non-payment of rates and dealing with that item, and Council supported the resolve to exercise the power under section 6.64 of the Local Government Act, Western Australia 1995, over Unit 1165 Maryvale Road, Myra, and take possession of the land with intent to sell as rates remain unpaid for a period of 3 years. 2, notes that attempts to recover the outstanding debt has been made by commencing proceedings in the Magistrates Court of Western Australia under section 6.56 of the Local Government Act 1995 and enforcement proceedings under the Civil Judgment Enforcement Act 2004 WA. 3, it appoints Cloud Payment Group to act on behalf of the Shire to take possession of the land. 4, authorises the CEO to set a reserve amount, and that was being carried by an absolute majority. The second item that we dealt with, ladies and gentlemen, was an item relating to a tender for electrical upgrades at the Bar of Isles Leisure Centre, and Council on this one agreed that Council awards the request of tender 0442-22 Bay of Isles Leisure Centre electrical upgrade to Griffiths Electrical Proprietary Limited as per the lump sum price. The third item that we dealt with related to the tender for cleaning of toilets and barbecue areas, and the Council carried the recommendation. The Council awards the request for tender 0446-22 public toilet facilities and barbecue cleaning to Dunn's Cleaning Services as per the schedule of rates from May 2022 to 30th of June 2025 with a 24-month option to extend subject to satisfactory performance. And the final item that we dealt with was item 17.4, and that item, need to get this one right. That was an item in regards to the Tuwaka property, and the Council endorsed the Council enter into a lease with the Scout Association of Australia, Western Australia branch, for portion of lot 457 South Coast Highway, Wandjamut Reserve 37535, subject to 1. Department of Land's approval, 2. Terms of lease being 21 years, 3. Annual lease fee being $110 including GST to begin being charged from year 2 of the lease, 4. The lease preparation fee of $132 including GST being waived, and 5. All relevant approvals being sought for development on the site. This was carried by an absolute majority. And that concludes our meeting for the March Ordinary Council meeting with all items dealt with this evening. Thank you. So it's time to close the meeting? Yeah. Councillors, I declare the meeting closed. I thank you all for your diligence tonight on it. We went through a fairly strong agenda, and it took us a while to work our way through it, but it's good to have additional thoughts come in if we can get the wording right as we go through it, and it's probably best to get the wording right before, if we can possibly do it, but we're able to work our way through it and achieve those outcomes. So I'm extremely pleased in what everyone did to make it a successful